I still remember the night my world fell apart. I was only 10 years old, but that memory is as clear as if it happened yesterday. It was a chilly evening in Biloxi, Mississippi, and the kind of night when the sky turned a deep inky black, making the stars look like tiny, distant diamonds. My mother, Mama, had a strange look in her eyes like she was planning something big. She borrowed a car and asked me to come with her. I thought we were going on an adventure, but little did I know what awaited us. We followed Daddy's truck from a distance. He worked late, and Mama always seemed tense when he did. His truck turned into a drugstore, and he came out with a giant red heart-shaped box of candy. It was Valentine's Day, and I thought it was a sweet gesture. But then he stopped at a liquor store and bought something that Mommy thought was champagne. My heart raced with excitement, thinking we were going to have a special celebration. But then Daddy's truck turned off the main road and into a trailer park. Mama drove slowly, and as we passed the last row, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Daddy was standing outside a trailer, hugging a woman with bright red hair. They were locked in each other's arms, and I could see Mama's hands shaking on the steering wheel. Her face was streaked with tears, and she pulled the car over to the side of the road. I got out of the car and went around to her side. I didn't know what to do, but I patted her on the back and kept saying, "It'll be all right, Mama, it'll be all right." But deep down, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Mama and I went back home, and we threw all of Daddy's belongings out on the front porch. We cried and threw clothes in a pile, and when we were done, she locked both doors. We watched through a crack in the Venetian blinds, waiting for Daddy to come home. Hours later, his truck pulled up, and he came to the door, trying to ignore the pile of clothes. "Honey, let me in, the screen is locked. Honey, please let me in, what's the matter?" he pleaded. After a few moments, Mama opened the door, but only the screen. "Go live with your Valentine whore," she said softly, then slammed the heavy wooden door in his face. I watched as he loaded his things into his truck, and Mama held me close as we watched him drive away. "Don't ever let this happen to you, my baby. Promise me you'll never let this happen to you," she whispered. And in that moment, I promised her I would never let anyone break my heart the way Daddy broke hers. But life has a funny way of testing your promises. That night, I was exhausted from work. The phone rang, and it was Glenda Manduffy, my best friend. She was practically bouncing with excitement. "June, you have to come with me to see Elvis Presley tonight. He's the most gorgeous man I've ever seen. Please, please say yes." I sighed, thinking about the hot bath I'd planned. "Glenda, I'm so tired. Can't I just take a bath and relax? The show doesn't start until 7:30. You have time. Just call Norby and tell him you have to go to Keesler Field with me. I'll even call Norby for you. We'll pick you up at 7 sharp, okay?" Reluctantly, I agreed. I took a quick bath and tried to decide what to wear. I chose a new white dress and white high-heel sandals. I was ready by 6:45, and I felt good. My mom came home just as I was about to leave. She looked me up and down. "You look pretty. Where are you going?" "I'm going to see a singer named Elvis Presley with Glenda. I'll be home by 9:30, I promised." Chester, Glenda's brother, picked us up. Glenda was practically bouncing in her seat. When we got to the Airmen's Club, she reminded me we had to be 18 to get in. I was nervous, but Chester assured us we'd be fine. We signed in and found a table right up front. The club was filling up fast. Young airmen whistled as we walked by, but Glenda was more excited about seeing Elvis. When the lights dimmed and the music started, Elvis walked onto the stage. I couldn't believe my eyes. He was breathtaking. His deep-set eyes and full lips made my heart race. He sang "That's All Right," and I was mesmerized. He looked my way a few times, and I felt my cheeks flush. After a few songs, the band took a break. Elvis was by the side entrance, talking to some people. Glenda wanted to go talk to him, but I was too nervous. She pulled me toward the ladies' room, hoping to pass by him. As we walked out, Elvis saw us and smiled. He reached through the crowd and took my arm. "Where are you going? You're not leaving, are you?" His voice was low and sexy, and I felt my knees go weak. "No, just going back to the table," I managed to say, my heart pounding. "I'd like to see you after the show. Are you staying?" I nodded, and we went back to our table. Glenda was practically jumping with excitement. "You lucky dog," she kept saying. Elvis came back on stage, and sang for another 40 minutes. The airmen kept us company, but they were blocking our view. We had to dance to see him. After the show, Glenda and Chester waited with me at the front. Elvis drove up in a light pink and black 1955 Ford Crown Victoria. An upright bass was strapped to the top, making the car look like a war machine. He opened the door for me, and we said goodbye to Glenda and Chester. "Would you mind if we went back to the motel?" he asked. "I need to take a quick shower." I nodded, and he went inside. Two men, Scotty and Bill, helped him with the bass. They were heading to Alabama in the morning. Elvis came out and said, "Okay, pretty girl, show me the town. Have you already forgotten my name?" I teased. "No, June, I haven't forgotten. You're just so pretty," he said, making me blush. We drove to Gus Stevens' restaurant and went into the lounge. The band was good, and we ordered Cokes. We talked and laughed, enjoying each other's company. The night was perfect. A slight breeze came off the water, and the beach was dotted with gas lanterns. I explained to Elvis about soft shell crabs and flounder, and he got excited about trying it next time. We drove to the front beach and parked in front of the White House Hotel. We walked on the pier, and the full moon lit our way. He held my hand until we got to the end. He stood behind me, his arms around my waist, and we watched the moon on the water. "Have you ever seen the moon on the water before?" I asked. "And not this much water. If you think this is pretty, you should see the moon on the snow. It's the most beautiful sight you'll ever see," he said, and I leaned back, feeling his kiss on my neck. It gave me chills. He kissed my neck again and again, and I felt like I was melting. "Right now, I can't think of any other place I'd rather be," he whispered. "Me neither," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I'm glad I live here." "I'm not talking about living here, June. I'm talking about being here with you." We spent the next few hours kissing and talking, watching the moon move slowly across the sky. He kissed me gently, and it was the most passionate kiss I had ever experienced. I told him it was my first time kissing on a first date, and he laughed. "I believe you, baby. I'm glad it was me." We checked the time, and it was 3:15. I was in big trouble. We rushed back to my house, and thankfully everything was quiet. I hoped my mom was sleeping. "Don't go yet, June. Stay with me a little longer," Elvis whispered. We giggled like kids, and I stayed, but I kept an eye out for any lights. We talked and kissed under the streetlight, and I felt like I was in a dream. I told him my last name, Juanico, and spelled it out for him. Finally, I had to go. I said goodbye, and he drove away. I walked to the door, feeling like the luckiest girl in the world. The aroma of freshly baked cinnamon rolls and crisp fried bacon was the one sure way Mama had of getting me out of bed. It was 10 a.m., and I'd only been in bed for 4 hours, but my stomach was growling. I hadn't eaten in over 24 hours and was starving. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and stumbled to the kitchen. Mama was at the stove, her back to me. "Would you like some eggs? And would you mind telling me why you were out so late?" I grabbed a hot cinnamon roll and sat down at the kitchen table. "I was out with a friend, Mama. His name is Elvis Presley. He's a singer, and we had a great time. I promise it won't happen again." Mama glanced over at the clock. "June, do you know what time it is? It's 6 a.m. It won't ever happen again, will it?" "No, Mama, it won't. I'm sorry." I poured myself a cup of coffee and started telling her about Elvis. I was talking so fast, she didn't have time to fuss at me. "He's really different, Mama. Kind of sexy looking." "Sexy? June, what do you know about sexy?" "Oh, Ma, you know what I mean." Just then, someone knocked at the front door. I was still in my PJ, so I ran to the bathroom. It was Norby. Mama told him I was getting dressed. She came into the room, shaking her head. I've never seen anyone as handsome as Norby Ronsonet. Norby was in the living room, reading the sports section of the newspaper. He smiled at me over the top of the paper. "Let's go spend the day at the river. Get your bathing suit on, the gang's waiting in the car." On the way to the river, one of Elvis's songs came on the radio. A few of our friends had seen him the night before. One of the girls told me I should have been there, that Elvis Presley was so good-looking he had all the girls going wild. Feeling a little guilty, I looked at Norby and smiled. We were free to date others, but until last night, I'd never done so. Our group consisted of 5 girls: Marie, her sister Rosalie, Rita, me, Pat, and me. Pat Napier was a newcomer. Her dad was a sergeant in the Air Force, stationed at Keesler. Pat and I spent a lot of time together in her dad's car, checking out all the local teen hangouts. Sergeant Napier got angry because his gas gauge was always on empty. He started checking the mileage. The streets were never crowded, so we drove around in reverse whenever possible. Pat would look through the rear window to see where she was going, and I would look through the windshield to let her know if any cars were behind us. We still laugh about all the crazy stunts we used to pull. One night, after going to an early movie, Pat came over to visit. My brother Jerry was home having a snack. I hadn't seen much of him since he'd started working a night shift. As kids, we'd had our little fights, but we got along well. One day, he took a metal ice tray from the freezer and told me to touch it with my tongue. I was dumb enough to do it, but smart enough to run to the kitchen sink and stick my tongue, along with the dangling ice tray, under the tap. In spite of his boyish pranks, he was still my hero. He could run faster, jump higher, and throw a ball farther than anyone in the neighborhood. "You should have been here 10 minutes ago. You had a person-to-person phone call," Jerry said as we walked in the door. "Who was it?" I asked, curious. "I don't know," Jerry answered. "You don't know, why didn't you ask?" My first thought was that Elvis had called, and my voice got louder and louder. "Hey girl, don't yell at me. Why don't you stay home sometime and answer the phone yourself?" he yelled. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to shout. You don't know who it was?" I asked meekly. "No, I don't know who it was, but it's not the first time he called. Why didn't you tell me?" I could hear myself getting loud again. "'Cause I forgot, that's why. He was yelling too. How many calls have I had?" "One other one, about 2 weeks ago." "How do you know it was a he?" "Because when the operator asked him if he would like to try his call again, he said, 'No thank you, operator.' All I know is he had a country twang." "Will you please do me a big favor? The next time, will you please get the number or ask who's calling?" I knew it had to be Elvis. I didn't know anyone else with a twang. Weeks went by and no phone calls. Maybe it wasn't him after all. I was busy having a good time, and didn't give it too much thought. Norby was a high school senior and a football star, so I wasn't seeing much of him. Occasionally, I would have a date with a guy named Edville Hughes. I felt very grown up with Edville. He was a few years older, and would take me out for dinner and dancing a big change from hamburgers and cokes at a drive-in. I loved getting all dressed up, and was spending all my money on clothes. One day, Pat and I went to Bernie's Drive-In for a Coke. It was a local hangout, only 2 blocks away, so we didn't have to worry about the mileage. We were gone less than an hour, but when we got back, Jerry told me I had just missed another person-to-person call. "Did you ask who it was? Call 0 and ask for operator number 4. When I called the operator and told her who I was, she said the caller hadn't left a name and couldn't be reached at that number any longer. The only thing she could tell me was that the call had come from Pritchard, Alabama. I didn't know anyone in Pritchard. "Pat, do you know anyone from Pritchard?" "No, I don't even know where Pritchard is." Curious about my phone call, Pat called the next morning. "Did you ever figure out who you knew in Pritchard?" "Oh yeah, it was Richard," I replied, joking. "Richard who?" "Richard from Pritchard. You remember him, don't you?" "I don't remember any Richard from Pritchard." "It's just a joke, Pat, just a joke." We laughed, and nothing about the calls was mentioned again. Marie had a vacation coming in May, and asked the 4 of us if we wanted to go to Memphis. I said I'd rather go to Florida, but she had the car, so we'd go where she wanted. It really didn't matter. We always had a good time regardless of where we were. We all started saving our money and making plans. Marie was more excited than anyone. She had just bought a brand new, hot pink, 1956 Ford Fairlane. We were going in style. We left Biloxi early one morning, and arrived in Memphis well after dark. We checked into the Holiday Inn, just outside Memphis, across the Wolf River. After breakfast, we drove downtown to check out all the stores, and pick up a few souvenirs. We were browsing in a store on Beale Street, and Marie was talking to an employee at Lansky Brothers, asking him for Elvis's address. She kept insisting that we were all close friends and had been invited. The man finally gave her the address, saying it didn't matter because Elvis was on tour. We had no trouble finding 1034 Audubon Drive. We parked the car on the street in front of the house. We could see a back, hoe, and other equipment in the backyard, behind the privacy fence, and figured he must be building a swimming pool. We sat in the car, wondering if the pool was going to be in the shape of a guitar. There was no fence across the front, and curiosity got the better of us. We decided to go take a peek. We piled out of the pink Ford and started walking up the driveway. We were almost to the house when we heard a car turn. Everyone stopped in their tracks. Everyone but me, that is. I kept walking toward the fence. Elvis was behind the wheel of a big pink Cadillac. His mother and father were next to him in the front seat. Elvis and his father were both dressed in dark suits. Mrs. Presley was wearing a black hat with a veil and a black dress. They looked as though they were returning from a funeral. Mr. and Mrs. Presley went in the house, and Elvis walked over to where the girls were standing. By this time, I was standing by the fence looking over at the pool, my back turned to everyone. I don't know if I was playing hard to get or just embarrassed to be caught trespassing. Probably both. "What are you doing home? You're supposed to be on tour," Marie said. "I got called home yesterday. My cousin drowned, and we had to go to the funeral. What are y'all doing in Memphis?" He looked my way. I just smiled. Marie answered. "We thought it would be a nice place to take a vacation." "Nice car, Marie. It is yours, right? I love the color." "I knew you'd like the color, Elvis. I thought of you when I bought it." The Ford and the Cadillac were the same color. I was wondering why Marie had never said anything to me about knowing Elvis. He knew her name. Would he remember mine? He motioned toward the backyard. "I'm having a pool put in." Everyone walked to the fence to have a look. Elvis came up behind me, put his hands on my waist, and lifted me off the fence. "What are you doing here, June? You vacationing too?" I just smiled, not saying anything. At least he remembered my name. "The last time I was in Biloxi, someone told me you were engaged to be married." He looked at Marie and then back to me. "Well, someone told you wrong. I am not, nor have I ever been, engaged to be married. How are you, Elvis?" "I'm doing great, June. I can't believe you're here. How long are you going to be in Memphis?" "We're supposed to stay a week." He wanted to know where we were staying and what we were going to do that evening. All the while, he was holding my hand. "We were talking about going to a movie tonight. I guess we're still going." I looked at Marie and she nodded. Mrs. Presley came to the door and told Elvis to come eat. She was giving him a polite way of saying goodbye, saving him from his fans. He told us goodbye and said he hoped he'd see us later. I thought he was just being polite. I didn't think we'd see him again. We went back to the motel. His name wasn't mentioned. That night, we went to see The Man Who Knew Too Much, with Doris Day and Jimmy Stewart. We'd been in the show about 15 minutes when Elvis came in and sat down next to me. "What are you doing here?" "I didn't expect to see you," I whispered. "Well, are you glad to see me or not?" He whispered back. "Yes, I'm glad to see you, just surprised, that's all." "How did you know we were here?" I spotted the pink Ford. He was holding my hand, and every now and then he would give it a little squeeze. I don't remember much of the movie, though I do remember Doris Day sang "Que Sera Sera." After it was over, Elvis invited the 5 of us back to his house. He could have easily fit us all in the huge black Cadillac he was driving, but he wanted to be alone with me. Elvis led the way, the pink Ford following close behind. He had opened the passenger side for me to get in. The car was so wide, I felt like I was a block away from him. Elvis's motorcycle roared to life outside our hotel room. I peeked out the window and saw him in all black, looking like a dream. I quickly slipped on my black outfit and rushed outside. He pulled up right to the door, and I hopped on behind him. He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me in close. "Is that as close as you can get, June?" he asked with a grin. "If I get any closer, I'll be sitting in front." I laughed. "Maybe that's not a bad idea," he teased. We took off for a tour of the city. First stop, a store to get me a motorcycle hat like his. We parked and went inside. Elvis knew the owner, and they chatted about the record business. Elvis had just gotten his first gold record for Heartbreak Hotel. He introduced me as his sweetheart from Biloxi. "This is my sweetheart, June. Ain't she the prettiest little thing you ever did see?" The store owner smiled and gave me a once-over. Then he noticed my foot covered in blood. "What happened, little lady?" I looked down. My black ballerina pumps weren't exactly motorcycle-friendly. Blood was seeping through. The owner grabbed a wet towel and Elvis cleaned my ankle. He found a deep scratch on my right ankle. "Damn, June, has anyone ever told you you have pretty feet?" I laughed. "No, Elvis, you're the first." The cut came from the license plate tag on the back of his bike. It had happened to a friend before. We left the store with matching hats, and I learned to be more careful when getting on the bike. Next, we visited a men's clothing store on Beale Street. Elvis bought a few shirts, and we chatted with the owner. Then we headed to Mud Island. Elvis asked how fast I wanted to go. "As fast as you can," I shouted. He revved the engine, and we took off. My heart pounded as I held on tight. After a few minutes, we slowed down. "How fast were we going?" I asked, still buried in his back. "About 120 miles per hour. Were you scared?" "Who, me? No way." I teased, but my heart was racing. We laughed and hugged, both out of breath. We sat by the river, and Elvis started singing "Ol' Man River." His deep, smooth voice gave me goosebumps. I told him he had a powerful voice, like Mario Lanza. "You really can sing, Elvis. I'm impressed," I said. "Thanks, June, I only sing like that for my mom," he said tenderly. We talked more, and I learned he had a strong Southern gentleman upbringing. We rode around Memphis, visiting places from his past. At a red light, a sailor made a comment, and Elvis took off, running the light. We had our first little argument. "You were flirting with those guys," he accused. "I wasn't flirting, you're just jealous," I laughed. "I'm not jealous, but I won't stand for anyone talking to you like that." We cooled off and continued our ride. Later, we stopped at a children's amusement park. We rode a mini train and enjoyed foot-long hot dogs. A little boy glared at us for taking the caboose, and his mom commented sarcastically. Elvis just smiled and revved the engine. We rode off, and he told me, "No wonder the kid is so bad. He takes after his mom." We spent the whole day together, and I felt a deep connection. Trying not to fall in love with Elvis was next to impossible. There were moments when we just looked into each other's eyes, lost in our own world. I knew I was crazy about him, and I think he knew it too. Elvis and I spent a few more minutes shelling peas, chatting and getting to know Alberta. She was a kind woman with a warm smile, and she seemed to fit right in with the Presleys. Mrs. Presley was still a bit quiet, but every now and then she'd join in the conversation, asking me more questions about my life in Biloxi. "Do you have any brothers or sisters, June?" Mrs. Presley asked, breaking the silence. "I have a brother, ma'am. His name is David. He's 2 years older than me. We're pretty close, even though he can be a bit of a pain sometimes," I said, laughing. "What about you, Mrs. Presley? Do you have any siblings?" "No, I'm an only child," she replied, her voice soft but warm. "But I've always wanted a sister. It must be nice to have someone close to your age." "It is, ma'am. David and I have always looked out for each other. He's the one who taught me how to fish and swim. I guess I owe him a lot." Alberta chimed in. "It sounds like you've got a good family, June. That's important." We finished up with the peas, and Mrs. Presley suggested we move to the dining room for a snack. She brought out a plate of homemade cookies and a pitcher of sweet tea. We all sat around the table, and the atmosphere felt more relaxed. "Elvis tells me you're a good cook, June. Maybe you can share some of your recipes with me sometime," Mrs. Presley said, her eyes twinkling. "I'd love to, Mrs. Presley. I've got a few that I'm pretty proud of, and I can always use some new ideas too." Elvis walked back into the room, his phone calls finished. He looked at me with a smile, and I could see the relief in his eyes. He knew I was getting along with his mom. "Everything okay, baby?" I asked, giving him a quick hug. "Yeah, everything's good. I've got some things to take care of later, but I'm all yours for now," he said, pulling out a chair for me. "Speaking of cooking, June, do you think you could make us some of those hard-fried eggs and bacon you mentioned the other day?" Mr. Presley asked, speaking up for the first time since we arrived. "Sure, Mr. Presley, I'd be happy to. I'd love to cook for you all." Elvis's eyes lit up. "That's great, June. Dad loves it when someone cooks a good breakfast. It's one of his favorite meals." I followed Mrs. Presley to the kitchen, where she showed me where everything was. The kitchen was cozy, with a large window overlooking the backyard. I could see why Elvis had such a strong connection to this place. "Do you want any help, June?" Mrs. Presley asked, standing by the stove. "No, ma'am, I've got it. You sit and enjoy your tea. I'll have breakfast ready in a jiffy." I started frying the bacon, and the smell filled the kitchen. I cracked the eggs and fried them just the way I knew Mr. Presley would like them, hard on the outside, but still a bit runny on the inside. I added a side of toast and some fresh fruit, and before long the table was set. "Breakfast is ready." I called out, and everyone made their way to the dining room. Elvis sat down across from me, and Mr. Presley at the head of the table. Mrs. Presley and Alberta joined us, and we all dug in. Mr. Presley took a bite of his eggs and nodded in approval. June, these are perfect, just the way I like them." "Thank you, Mr. Presley. I'm glad you like them." Elvis reached over and squeezed my hand. "Told you, baby, my dad's got a good taste." After breakfast, we all helped clean up the dishes. Mrs. Presley and Alberta chatted about the day's plans, and Elvis and I retreated to the living room. We sat on the couch, and he wrapped his arm around me. "I'm glad you're getting along with my parents, June. They're really important to me." "I can tell, Elvis, they're great people. Your mom's a little quiet, but I think she's warming up to me." "She will, baby. She's just a bit protective, but she's really a softie." We spent the rest of the morning talking and laughing, enjoying each other's company. Elvis showed me some of his favorite spots around the house, and we even played a game of cards. By the time lunch rolled around, I felt like I was part of the family. As the day went on, I couldn't help but think about how much I'd fallen for Elvis. He was more than just a handsome face. He was kind, caring, and had a heart of gold. I knew I wanted to spend more time with him, and I hoped he felt the same way. When it was time to leave, Elvis walked me back to the Holiday Inn. We stood in the courtyard, and he pulled me close. "Thank you for today, June. It meant a lot to me." "It meant a lot to me too, Elvis. I had a great time." He kissed me gently on the lips, and I felt my heart skip a beat. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" "Okay, Elvis, I'll be waiting." He gave me one last hug, and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away, feeling a mix of happiness and longing. I couldn't wait to see him again. "June, you've been doing all the talking and the pea-picking too," Mrs. Presley said with a smile. "I'm sorry, I guess I have been talking up a storm," June replied, feeling a bit embarrassed. "No, don't be sorry, hon. Keep on talking. I like hearing all about you. What else can you do besides cook?" Mrs. Presley asked, genuinely curious. June thought for a moment. "I know how to sew, I embroider, and I crochet. I'm also good at cleaning house. I don't do laundry well, but I'm pretty good with the ironing board and iron," she said, trying not to sound too boastful but feeling nervous and wanting to share everything at once. "You know how to sew too?" Mrs. Presley asked, her eyes widening. "Yeah, I make most of my own clothes," June replied, hoping she wasn't sounding too show-offy. "You're kidding. You don't look like you could do all that. Most girls your age don't know how to do all that," Mrs. Presley continued, her tone filled with admiration. "I guess it's because I started so young," June explained, her nerves making her talk faster than usual. "It's just that you're so pretty and you already know how to do all those things. That's very unusual, June," Mrs. Presley said, her smile warm and genuine. "Thanks, Mrs. Presley," June said, feeling her cheeks flush. Alberta, who had been listening quietly, smiled at June. "Child, you gonna make somebody a good wife," she said, and June blushed even more, emptying another bowl of peas. Mrs. Presley laughed, showing that she hadn't finished her first bowl yet. "Did you make the clothes you have on, June?" "I bought the blouse, but I made the skirt," June replied, standing up so Mrs. Presley could see better. Mrs. Presley inspected the hem, the waistband, the zipper, and even the kick pleat in the back. "You did a beautiful job, June, very professional. How long have you been sewing?" Mrs. Presley asked, her eyes bright with interest. "I don't know exactly, Mrs. Presley. I used to watch my mother sew all the time. She made all my clothes when I was little. I guess I started sewing right after she went to work, when I was about 12 years old," June explained, feeling a bit more relaxed now. "You could sew for other people, June. Have you ever thought about that? A good seamstress makes good money," Mrs. Presley suggested. "Not really, Mrs. Presley. Sewing is very hard and time-consuming. I made Easter dresses for 2 of my friends here in Memphis, but I wouldn't want to do it professionally. I like doing it for fun," June said, hoping she wasn't sounding too boastful again. "My goodness, June, you have all that talent, and you're pretty to boot," Mrs. Presley said, her praise making June feel even more flattered. "Thank you, Mrs. Presley. You're making me blush," June said, feeling her cheeks turn red again. "I wish you'd call me Gladys, June. I want you to feel at home," Mrs. Presley said, her tone warm and inviting. "I do feel at home, Mrs. Presley, but I was taught at a young age to call my elders Mr. or Mrs. It was drilled into my head. My mother said it was a sign of good manners and respect. I'd have a hard time calling you by your first name," June explained, feeling a bit torn. "Well, anyway, June, my name is Gladys Love Presley, and you can call me whatever makes you happy," Mrs. Presley said with a smile. "Your middle name is Love. I've never heard that before, Mrs. Presley. Love is a beautiful name," June said, genuinely impressed. "Thanks, June, you're very sweet," Mrs. Presley replied, her eyes twinkling. All the peas had finally been shelled. June helped Alberta clear the table while Mrs. Presley poured them another cup of coffee. "That's it for now. Let's finish our coffee and go find Elvis. Alberta can start breakfast when we get out of her kitchen," Mrs. Presley said, and June gulped the hot coffee, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. Her mind was ready for a break. They found Elvis lying across his massive, made-to-order, larger-than-king-size bed. He was sound asleep, an open copy of Billboard magazine resting on his chest. With his hair hanging in his face, he looked like an innocent little boy. Mrs. Presley admired her beautiful son for a moment, before tenderly brushing his hair from his eyes. "Wake up, baby boy, you've got company," she said softly. Elvis sat straight up and apologized for falling asleep. "Elvis, did you know that June can cook?" Mrs. Presley asked, her eyes shining with pride. "Can you, June?" Elvis asked, surprised. "You'll have to cook something for me one of these days," he added, his eyes twinkling. "I'll be happy to. What's your favorite dish?" June asked, smiling. Mrs. Presley went back to the kitchen, and Elvis closed the door behind her before pulling June over to the massive bed. "You're my favorite dish, June," he said, laughing. He picked her up and threw her in the middle of the bed. They rolled over and over, laughing like children. He kissed her all over her face, his hands pinning her arms over her head as he half sat on her stomach. June's laughter stopped abruptly. Having her arms pinned down reminded her of an unpleasant incident from when she was 16. A guy had pinned her down in the back seat of his car at a drive-in movie. The more she struggled, the tighter he held her. She had managed to free one hand and hit him with a root beer bottle, which ended the date in the emergency room. "What's the matter, June? Was I hurting you, baby?" Elvis asked, his face full of concern. "We shouldn't be in here. Your parents will think I'm wild or something worse," June said, her voice trembling a bit. "My parents won't think anything of the kind, June," Elvis reassured her. "Well, at least get up and open the door, okay?" June insisted. "Okay, June, if that'll make you feel better," Elvis said, opening the door wide. He ran back to the bed and started tickling her. "Now, does that make my girl happy? Mama wouldn't think anything bad about you, June. She likes you." "I want her to keep liking me, and how do you know she does?" June asked, her heart still racing. "Because she told me so just a few minutes ago. When I left you in the kitchen, I didn't have to make any calls. I wanted you to spend some time with Mama so she could get to know you. She really likes you, June. She told me so," Elvis explained, his eyes full of sincerity. They got into a playful wrestling match, with a few kisses thrown in here and there. They ended up on the floor several times, and when their mouths bumped, they both tasted blood. One of them had a busted lip, but it didn't matter. They climbed back on the bed and continued to wrestle until Mrs. Presley came in, telling them to come eat. "I hate to disturb you two. I haven't heard this much laughter in a long time. Go wash your little faces and come get some breakfast," she said, her tone light and teasing. When they walked into the brightly lit bathroom, they started laughing again. Their faces were a mess of lipstick and blood. Elvis pulled his lower lip down and whimpered, showing her the tiny cut. "Oh, poor baby, do you want me to call the doctor?" June asked, her voice full of concern. "No, just kiss it and make it all better," Elvis answered in his baby voice. He and his mother were great at baby talk, and it wasn't long before they had June talking it too. The aroma of burning bacon filled the air when they got to the kitchen. 6 slices of bacon, burned to a crisp, were neatly arranged on a plate in front of Elvis. June thought Mrs. Presley was playing a joke, but she soon learned that Elvis had been eating bacon prepared this way all his life. He also had to have his eggs fried hard as a brick. Other than these peculiarities, his eating habits were pretty normal. Alberta had prepared everything but the biscuits, which were Mrs. Presley's specialty. They were fluffy and delicious, the best biscuits June had ever tasted. She told Mrs. Presley so, and the older woman beamed with pride. "You see, Mama, I told you, you make the best biscuits in the whole world," Elvis said proudly. "I've had lots of practice," Mrs. Presley replied, graciously accepting the compliments. When they finished eating, Elvis took his plate and June's to the sink. June started gathering the rest of the dirty dishes, but Mrs. Presley stopped her. "Leave it, June. You two kids go play. We'll take care of the dishes," she said, her tone warm and motherly. Elvis and June went out into the backyard and walked around the unfinished, rectangular swimming pool. About 10 inches of rainwater had collected in the deep end. They sat on the edge of the pool, and Elvis started talking about his family and all the changes taking place in their lives. "June, you can't imagine how good it makes me feel to be able to give them all of this. Mama, bless her sweet heart, still thinks this is all too good to be true. It's like a dream to her. She's afraid she'll wake up one morning and will be poor again. I'm not gonna let that happen, June. I've got to make it for my mama. She's worked hard all her life to take care of me, both of them have. And now, thank the good Lord, I'm gonna make life easy for them," Elvis said, his eyes filled with determination. "You're a good person, Elvis. Your mother is very proud of you, and rightfully so," June said, her heart swelling with admiration. "She really likes you, June. When we were having breakfast, she looked at me, then at you. And when she looked back at me, she winked. I know her, June. She don't have to say a word. She talks to me with her eyes," Elvis explained, his eyes lighting up. "I like your mother, too. She's very down to earth and easy to talk to. She had me talking my head off this morning," June said, feeling a deep connection to the Presley family. "She'll have you telling her your life story if you don't watch out," Elvis teased. "I think I told her most of it already," June laughed. "My daddy is just the opposite. He don't have much to say until he gets to know you, and then he still don't have much to say," Elvis said, laughing. He talked jokingly about his father, but when he spoke of his mother, his eyes sparkled with love. Sitting on the edge of the pool, his elbows resting on his knees, Elvis watched a bug swimming frantically in circles in the rainwater at the bottom of the pool. Anxiously awaiting an important phone call, he glanced at his watch every few minutes. His energy level was so high he couldn't stay in one place for long. June suggested they go back inside and listen to some music. She requested something by Elvis Presley, and he was more than happy to oblige. His first album, Elvis Presley, was the biggest-selling album in RCA Victor's history. He put the album on the hi-fi, and they made themselves comfortable on the floor in front of the speakers. They both enjoyed the feel of the sumptuous carpet, something neither of them had known as children. Mr. Presley came into the den with a huge duffel bag filled with fan mail slung across his back, looking like Santa Claus. "Where do you want this, son? Do you want to read any of this, or do you want me to stack it in the back?" he asked. "Leave it here, Daddy. I'll get June to help me go through it in a while," Elvis said, and June was glad he said in a while. She was so content, lying side by side on the floor with Elvis, listening to his album and looking into his eyes, that she didn't want to move. When the song "I Got a Woman" came on, Elvis pulled June to her feet, put his left hand on her forehead and his right hand on her stomach, playing her like an upright bass. It was one of the cutest things he ever did, and he did it often. June knew to be standing on her feet, and ready every time a song with a good bass came on. "Bill Black should have a bass like you, June. You never need tuning," Elvis said, referring to his bass player. "Just don't think you can strap me on top of the car, Elvis. There's some things I won't let you get away with," June teased. After hearing both sides of the album, Elvis put on the album he played the most. It was an album by the Platters, with two of his all-time favorite songs, "Only You" and "My Prayer." He sang along with the record, and June gave him her undivided attention. When the music stopped, Elvis picked up the duffel bag and dumped the contents on the floor. He had recently hired a secretary to read the mail and reply to requests for autographed pictures, but when he had time, he enjoyed reading it himself. "My fans are very important to me, June. Without them, I'd still be driving a truck," Elvis said, his tone sincere. Geez, my knees, I've never seen so many letters. Do you get this much mail all the time? June asked, amazed. This is nothing, June. Most of the time it's 2 or 3 bags. Wanna help me read some? Elvis asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. June picked one at random. It was from an 18-year-old girl in Alabama who wanted an autographed picture and had enclosed a photo of herself in a bathing suit. She showed the picture to Elvis. Wow, put that one on the side, June. I'll have to get the name and phone number for my little black book. Elvis teased, and June laughed, knowing he was joking. Where is your book? I'll make a list of all the good ones for you, June replied, playing along. You would too, wouldn't you, June? Elvis laughed. Sure, I wouldn't want you to miss out on anything, June said with a smile. She started reading the next letter aloud, making it up as she went along. Wow, listen to this one. My darling Elvis, I think I'm in love with you. I know you could love me too. I never miss a show. The next time you're in any of the southern states, look for me. I always wear a pink scarf around my neck. Please send me one of your sexy pictures. Love, Ralph. Let me see that, June. You've got to be kidding. Elvis snatched the letter from her hand and laughed when he realized she had made it up. A lot of the letters had been soaked in perfume, and the combined odors were making June feel nauseous. They put all the mail back in the duffel bag, and Elvis carried it to a room at the back of the house, where bags and bags were neatly stacked to the ceiling. For lunch, Mrs. Presley had prepared a traditional country-style meal. They had the field peas they had shelled that morning, mashed potatoes, cornbread made from scratch, and the most delicious fried chicken June had ever tasted. Mrs. Presley was flattered when June said it was better than her mother's fried chicken, and her mother's fried chicken was to die for. Mrs. Presley gave all the credit to the new electric deep fryer Elvis had bought her recently. It uses a lot of grease, June, but if you strain it real good afterwards and keep it in the icebox, you can use it over and over again, Mrs. Presley explained. Elvis was a millionaire, or close to it, and she was still trying to be thrifty. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Elvis realized his important phone call wasn't coming. He stormed into the den, where Mr. Presley was stretched out on the couch, watching television. Go call him on the phone, Daddy, and tell him if it's not ready by tomorrow, they can just forget the whole deal, he said, his frustration evident. Be patient, son, be patient. It'll be ready tomorrow, Mr. Presley replied, trying to calm his son. It took a while, but Elvis finally calmed down and stopped fidgeting. Skipping supper that night, they went to the amusement park, rode every ride available, and played every game. The baseball throw was their last game. Elvis was saving the best for last. He positioned June on his left side, next to the counter. Elvis phoned the room early the next morning, and I answered on the first ring. I have some business to take care of this morning, so I'll pick you up at 2 o'clock. I don't know what we'll do today, but I'll think of something. Will you be there at 2? I'll be right here, I said, excited. The girls and I drove downtown to get some food and pick up a few souvenirs. I kept checking my watch every 15 minutes. I didn't want to miss him. I felt a bit guilty, leaving the girls every day, but I told myself they'd do the same if they had the chance. It was almost 2 o'clock when we got back to the motel. Elvis was waiting for me in the courtyard. He said he had been there less than a minute. We stayed at the hotel long enough for Elvis to take a few snapshots with the girls. When we got in the car, we hugged and kissed like we hadn't seen each other in ages. It felt amazing, knowing he was just as excited to see me as I was to see him. Will it be okay with you, baby, if we just hang around the house again today? I'm still expecting that important phone call, Elvis said, sounding a bit apologetic. I don't care what we do, Elvis, as long as I'm with you. When we pulled into the driveway, Mr. Presley was sitting in the car, waiting to take Mrs. Presley grocery shopping. They were babysitting the telephone until Elvis got home. I felt a little strange being in the house alone with Elvis, even though Mrs. Presley had said they'd be right back. Elvis put some soft music on the hi-fi and took some throw pillows from the couch and placed them on the floor in front of the speaker. He seemed to be moving in slow motion, which was a nice change from his usual hyperactivity. He laid his head in my lap, closed his eyes, and enjoyed having my fingers running through his hair. We were still in the same position when the Presleys returned. Mrs. Presley smiled when she saw Elvis's head in my lap. You better watch it, June. He'll stay there forever if you play with his hair. I hated to disturb him, but my legs were starting to fall asleep. I was glad when Mrs. Presley brought in 2 bowls of ice cream. It gave me a chance to stretch. As soon as we finished the ice cream, Mr. Presley came in. "Telephone for you, son." Elvis jumped up and ran to his bedroom. He was gone for about 5 minutes and came back smiling. "Come with me, June." He pulled me to my feet and hugged me tight. "Baby, you've got to go with me." "Okay, let's go." "Where to?" "To pick up my new car." He lifted me off the floor and spun me around. Then he put me down and put both hands on my shoulders. "And now, let me see. This is what we've got to do. You go call the motel and see if Marie is there. Ask her if she can pack a few things for you and bring them over here." "Pack a few things? Why, where are we going?" "We're flying to Houston, Texas. We'll be staying overnight." "Go ahead, baby, call them. Ask them to come over and visit for a while. Hurry up, I have to use the phone. I've got to call the airport and make reservations. Then I have to call and find a hotel near the Cadillac Company." "The girls won't like this, Elvis." "Sure they will, June. They had a good time over here." "I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about me going out of town with you." "They're not gonna say anything, June. Go call them." "There's something you don't understand, Elvis. The only reason I'm here is because Marie wanted to take her vacation in Memphis. I didn't realize until after we were here that the only reason we came to Memphis was to see you." "June, if I was you, I wouldn't worry about it. When I was in Biloxi doing a show, I was asking around whether anyone knew June Juanico, and Marie told me she was your best friend. I asked her if she would go out after the show, and she and some of her friends went with us to a nightclub. Marie's a nice girl, June. She won't be mad with you." "Yeah, that's why I was so surprised to see you. What's with this guy she told me about?" "What guy? I'm seeing several guys. I'm not engaged. I'm not even going steady." He took my face in his hands and looked in my eyes. "No one special in your life?" "Yes, my mother is the one special person in my life." "No special guys?" he asked. "Only you." I answered, smiling. He smiled back and kissed me gently on the lips. "Go make that call, June." I called the room and Marie answered the phone. I told her I was going out of town with Elvis, and asked her if she'd pack a few things for me and come over to his house. She asked what I was going to do about Edville, the guy I'd been dating back in Biloxi. "What about Edville? I'm not engaged to Edville. We're not even going steady, Marie." "I know, June, but if he finds out about this, it'll break his heart." "Marie, I'm not about to go home and rub it in his face. If you don't want to come over here, I'll get Elvis to take me to get my clothes." "No, it's okay. I'll pack a few things for you and we'll be there in a little while. I just want you to be sure you know what you're doing." "I'm not doing anything wrong, Marie, I promise." "Thanks, Marie, and don't forget my PJ." Marie was the oldest in the group, and I thought I should have her permission. I hung up the phone, knowing Marie wasn't too happy about my going out of town with Elvis. But I told myself I was a big girl, and didn't have to answer to anyone but my mother. When the girls arrived about 30 minutes later, Elvis and I both answered the door. I took the overnight case from Marie, thanked her, and put it in the foyer. We all followed Elvis to the den, where he was the perfect host, making sure his attention was spread equally. I felt like the girls were being a little cool to me, but I wasn't going to let it bother me. I didn't plan to take Elvis away from anyone. He was the one who chose me, and I was having the time of my life. They all played King of the Mountain on a big round ottoman in the middle of the floor. I didn't want to get mussed, so I just watched. With the girls double-teaming Elvis, he didn't stand a chance. They laughed as hard as they played until Elvis had to go get cleaned up for the trip. We had to be at the airport in an hour. I still looked good. I'd made sure of that before I left the motel. Elvis came back to the den, smelling great and looking his usual gorgeous self, and said it was time for us to leave. The girls got up off the floor, said their goodbyes to me, kissed Elvis, and left. We were still standing at the front door, waving to the girls, when Mrs. Presley walked up behind us and put her arms around us both. "You two have a good time, be careful, and call me as soon as you land. Elvis, you be sure and mind your manners." She kissed Elvis on the cheek, took me by the hand, and led me to the living room. I looked around. Elvis was nowhere in sight. "June, I need to talk to you for a minute. How old are you?" "I'm 18, Mrs. Presley." "Are you sure, June?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, I'm sure." Actually, I'm 18 and a half. I just wanted to be sure. You know, Elvis could get in lots of trouble if you were underage, 'cause he's taking you across the state line. I promise you, Mrs. Presley, Elvis could take me anywhere in the world and he'd never get in any trouble. And about Elvis's manners, Mrs. Presley, I wouldn't worry one bit. Elvis took me around town the other day and introduced me to all his friends. What impressed me the most about him was his impeccable manners. You've done a great job, Mrs. Presley. Well, thank you, June. I tried to do right. You did right, Mrs. Presley, believe me. My mother always said you can tell how a person was raised by his manners, and that good manners are a gift of love from your parents. She lightly brushed my face with the back of her fingers, the same way she did with Elvis when she called him her Satinin. I guess I'll have to call you my little Satinin, 'cause your face is soft and smooth like satin too. Thank you, Mrs. Presley. It's the truth, June. You're very special to Elvis, I know. Not only because he told me so. I could tell by the way he looks at you. Elvis is very special to me too, Mrs. Presley. I know that too, June. Well now, you two go along and have a good time. Make sure he calls me as soon as you land. Not to worry, Mrs. Presley. I'll make sure he calls. Elvis was just hanging up the phone when we went back to the den. I know Elvis will take good care of you, June, and I want you to take good care of him. Did my two favorite girls have a good talk? Elvis asked, hugging his mother and giving me a wink. Don't worry, Mama. I'll take good care of June. Elvis, I think we should keep June around. What do you think? She winked at me. She walked us out to the car. Mr. Presley had started the car and was sitting in the driver's seat. The three of us rode in the front seat of Mrs. Presley's big pink Cadillac. The drive to the airport was very quiet. Mr. Presley didn't say a word until we were getting out of the car. Son, don't forget to call your mama. Okay, Daddy, I won't forget. We walked into the terminal, picked up our tickets, and went straight to the plane. In those days, you had to walk outside and climb the portable stairway to the plane amid the roaring noise. Elvis never let go of my hand. I thought it was because he didn't want to lose me, but I realized after we were buckled up and ready for takeoff that he was afraid. It was only a month earlier that his airplane had developed engine trouble and almost crashed somewhere in Texas. He had promised his mother he would never fly again, only to break that promise for this trip. His last one, he promised again. His grip was getting tighter and tighter. I finally had to take my hand from his and massage it to get the circulation back. Oh, baby, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was hurting you. I hate flying. It makes me a nervous wreck. Aren't you nervous? I don't know. This is my first time on a plane. I don't know if I'm nervous or excited. I guess I'd be nervous if I wasn't sitting here next to you. What difference does that make, June? Well, it's like when we were going real fast on the motorcycle. I was scared at first, and then I thought nothing can happen to me when I'm with you. You're special and loved by thousands of people, and I think God has a special plan for you. Come on, June, be serious. I am serious. You have lots of good things yet to come. You have already touched a lot of people and made them happy for just knowing you. God knows all this. Do you think he would let anything bad happen to you? I don't. The engines started to rev up. He looked at me and smiled. You're not afraid, June? No, I'm not afraid. We started down the runway, both of us looking through the tiny window, watching the ground go by faster and faster. His left hand was holding my right. My left hand was on top of his left hand, and his right hand was on top of my left. We were in the air and starting to level off when we began pulling our hands apart, just like in that kid's game where you take your hands from the bottom and move them to the top of a baseball bat. We both laughed. His tension was easing. Then I heard and felt a thud under my feet. What was that? I shrieked. That's only the landing gear. I thought you weren't afraid. He laughed. Are we going to land? I asked, trying to sound calm. No, silly. The wheels are going back up under the plane. Have you ever seen a plane flying around with its wheels hanging down? We both laughed. Even today, I smile when I'm flying and feel the thud of the landing gear. I love you, June Juanico. I love you too, Elvis Presley. You're the most fun person I've ever known. The cloud formations all looked like cartoon characters. We found Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and even Popeye, with his pipe in his mouth. We snacked on cheese and crackers, while we searched the clouds for characters. We talked about our families, and about doing funny things when we were kids. He asked if I had any precious memories, but I couldn't think of any memory I considered precious. I have one precious memory, June, and it just happened recently. It was the look on my mother's face when I gave her my gold record of Heartbreak Hotel. It's a memory I'll cherish for the rest of my life. The stewardess came down the aisle with a notebook in her hand, asking all the passengers their name and destination. I wanted to know why. They had already taken our names and all that at the ticket counter. Elvis said he didn't know why, it was probably in case we crashed or something. The captain's voice came over the scratchy PA system, announcing the time of day and the current temperature. We would be landing in approximately 15 minutes and were advised to buckle our seat belts. The plane landed smoothly on the runway. My first flight, and one that I would never forget. Elvis and I finally made it to the hotel after a long day. He signed us in and we got our room keys. I was relieved and a bit disappointed when I saw we had different room numbers. Elvis picked up our bags and we went to my room first. He closed the door behind us and kissed me. Then he picked up both suitcases again. "Now let's go see my room," he said with a smile. We took the elevator up one floor. I complained that we weren't on the same floor, but when we got to Elvis's room, I saw it wasn't just a room, it was a big, beautiful suite. "This is better, don't you think? We'll stay here," he said, pulling me close. "June, I love you. I would never hurt you. Trust me, baby." I felt nervous, but somehow knew I could trust him. "I requested 2 rooms so no one would think we were, living together," he explained. "Reporters can get real nasty, and lately, I've been making a lot of headlines. Stay with me tonight, June. I promise I won't do anything but hold you." I couldn't resist his gentle words. We sat on the bed, and he called the Cadillac company. We went downstairs to wait for his new car, a white Cadillac Eldorado convertible. He wouldn't tell me anything about it, wanting it to be a surprise. I tried to guess which car was his, but he just laughed and said I'd never know. "Turn around and face me, and I'll let you know when I see it," I said. The street was full of fancy cars, but I spotted his and turned him around just in time to see a beat-up old green car. He laughed and twirled me around, saying, "June, you're crazy. I'm gonna keep you with me forever." The Cadillac pulled up, and the driver handed the keys to Elvis. We both saw how beautiful it was, and I couldn't decide what was more stunning, the car or the smile on Elvis's face. We drove around Houston for hours, singing along to the radio. When the gas tank was almost empty, we stopped at a service station and filled up. Then we went to a drive-in restaurant for some food. "I hope this little girl doesn't know who I am," Elvis said, but he still loved the attention. I turned his face away, so the car hop wouldn't recognize him. She brought our food and we dove into our cheeseburgers. Elvis finished my sandwich for me. We talked about everything under the sun, and our conversation turned to the future. "What do you want to be when you grow up, June?" Elvis asked. "I don't ever want to grow up. Grown-ups don't have as much fun," I replied, feeling like a happy child. "Good idea, June. You can always be my little pee-pee britches," he said in baby talk. "What kind of britches?" I asked, remembering he'd said it before. "Like when little kids wet their pants. Mama used to call me that." "Gee, Elvis, you remember that far back." "It wasn't that long ago. I remember lots of things from when I was young." "Oh, now I get it. You were 10 years old and still wetting your pants, right?" I laughed. "What am I gonna do with you, June?" He stopped laughing and got serious. "June, I love you." "I love you too, Elvis," I said, but he wasn't done. "No, June, I don't mean I love you like I love everybody. I mean I really love you." I didn't know what to say. This was the first time he had been serious about love. "You don't believe me, do you, June?" "I'll bet you say that to all the girls, Elvis." "No, I don't. Only the pretty ones," he joked. "No, baby, I'm just kidding. I've never felt this way about a girl before. I think I loved you last summer when we first met. I couldn't believe my eyes when I drove into the driveway and there you were. You were beautiful." "I was glad to see you too, Elvis. Surprised too. You were supposed to be on tour." "I know, June. We were supposed to be together. It was fate. Everything we do in life is part of God's plan. It was fate." I believed in fate too, but I was at a loss for words. He kept talking about how fate had brought us together. Speaking of fate, that reminds me of a song, "Are You Lonesome Tonight" by the Ink Spots. You've heard it before, haven't you, Elvis? "Yes, it's one of my favorites. I think I should record it someday." "Good, you can dedicate it to me, and to Houston, Texas." "I wouldn't dedicate it to you, June. It's a sad song, Don't ever drift away from me, baby. I'm not going anywhere, Elvis. I promise. Promise. Yes, I promise. We snuggled up together in the car, and when I Want You, I Need You, I Love You came on the radio, he sang along softly. He kissed my forehead and whispered, Is my little PP britches tired? He started the car and signaled the car hop to pick up the tray. When she recognized Elvis, she got excited. He flirted with her a little, and I playfully hit him on the arm. You're nothing but a big flirt, Elvis Presley. You had some nerve calling me a flirt the other day. I didn't call you a flirt, honey. You did too, and please don't ever call me honey. It has unpleasant memories. Oh, that? I was just mad, that's all. You were flirting with me last summer in Biloxi. I beg your pardon, it was you doing all the flirting. I was just giving you my smile of approval because I liked your singing. Yeah, we were both flirting with each other. You wanted to be with me as much as I wanted to be with you. Right, I answered, snuggling up to him. It's been a long day, baby. I know you've got to be tired. I'm not tired, my love, I'm exhausted. What was that? Did I hear you say my love? It must have been a slip of the tongue, I joked. It was a nice slip, baby. Do you mind me calling you baby? Not at all. As a matter of fact, I love it. You'll be going back to Biloxi in a few days. I'm gonna miss you, baby. I hate to think about going back to Biloxi. I'm going to miss you too, my love. When we got back to the hotel, Elvis carried me into the room and laid me on the bed. He went to shower, and I went to the bathroom. I realized I had no toothbrush or makeup, so I used Elvis's toothbrush. I decided it was just a mistake that Marie forgot them. I put on my baby doll PJ, and felt a bit nervous about letting Elvis see me in them. Elvis was sitting on the bed when I came out of the bathroom. He put down the room's service menu and looked at me. I walked over to his side of the bed and sat down. Oh, before you get in, June, get my watch on the dresser. I got up and walked across the room, and he started to whistle. I don't care what time it is, June. I just wanted to watch you walk. Did I ever tell you I was strictly an ass and leg man? He said, laughing. I jumped on top of him, and we wrestled until we were both out of breath. My nervousness was gone, and we cuddled together, fitting like spoons. We fell asleep on the same pillow. Early the next morning, the phone rang, and Elvis answered his wake-up call. He noticed we had both slept on the same pillow and asked about the other one. I have it between my legs, I answered. Lucky pillow, he said with a grin. I borrowed his toothbrush again and got dressed. I gave myself one last glance in the mirror, feeling like a sixth grader without makeup. Thanks for the use of your toothbrush, I said. My toothbrush, didn't you bring your own? I didn't pack, remember. Oh, that's right, Marie packed for you. What else did she forget? Just my makeup. You don't need all that junk on your face anyway. You're beautiful just the way you are, he said, stroking my face. My beautiful little Satinin. That's what your mother called me. What does it mean? She used to sing it to me when I was little. Mama's little baby has satinin skin, you know, skin soft as satin. There was a knock on the door, and a waiter brought in a cart full of food. We set the table and started uncovering dishes. There was enough food to feed an army, but we laughed and enjoyed every bite. Being in Houston with Elvis was one of the most fun times I'd ever had.